We now return to Halloween Homecoming, an unofficial Halloween web novel, written by Robert Kask. Chapter 3. In those golden years of childhood, the autumn season often goes underappreciated. Its cool breezes and endless supply of fallen leaves just can't seem to match the unabated highs of homework-free winter nights, wrapped presents, and blankets of fresh snow. For the older residents of Haddonfield, specifically those caught in the violent throes of their hometown's only claim to fame, the arrival of autumn stands as a grim reminder of the capabilities of human apathy and the dangers that exist just beyond the margins of daylight. For these residents, the autumn equinox is the beginning of darker days. This holds especially true for the town's sheriff, Lee Brackett. Though now an astute man of the law with a low threshold for bullshit and an entire town within his ambit, as a child he was simple-minded, displaying a foolhardy and naive attitude towards life as if it were a game of Indians and cowboys. Sturdy as bricks, he was a mountain of a child, demanding the respect and attention of his peers as they played along Haddonfield's small hills, reenacting frontier battles and mimicking the sounds of hooves on dirt as they blasted their cap guns into the air. In this guileless simulacrum of life, good guys got the girls, and bad guys bit bullets. Simpler times called for simpler viewpoints, Brackett told himself. He was only 8 then, but even now he could still smell the delineated notes of honeysuckle flowers and that particularly balmy aroma that wafts out from the cornfields, one Brackett could only describe as corny, but in a good way. All these memories circled Brackett's dozing mind like a whirlpool, flashing in and out of his consciousness just as fast as the synapses in his brain could discharge them, reminding him of better days left behind. His eyes fluttered under the veil of sleep, darting over the memories, aimlessly picking up the fragmented moments in time, until finally his eyes came to rest upon just one, his recollection of Halloween night, 1974. The sheriff recalled those senseless killings with pristine clarity. He was 26, and still a broad-shouldered straight shooter with a heart full of ambition, a mind sharper than steel, and something to prove. He was only a deputy, working under then-Sheriff Ron Barstow, but he took his job seriously, and he cared for the community that had sprung up in the picture-perfect Illinois suburbs like they were his own family. And in a way, they were. It was that attachment that would put him on the path of a lawman, and directly at odds with the cancerous growth that was Michael Myers. 9 years ago, Brackett and his partner, Frank Hawkins, were called out to 709 Lambkin Lane in response to a homicide and a missing child. An 18-year-old, Judith Doyle, had been brutalized and left for dead within the Myers household. Her brother, Tommy, had sneaked out of his babysitter's house earlier that night and couldn't be found, and everyone expected the worst. The officers were told the suspect was still in his Halloween costume, and that it was an 11-year-old boy. Imagine their dismay. In Hawkins' eyes, this was an impossibility. He's just a kid, he told Brackett. No way Michael did this, no way in hell. But when they encountered Michael that night, seemingly in a trance and unresponsive to even his own name, bloodied from head to toe and wandering the streets aimlessly, Hawkins knew. When Brackett peered into a pair of eyes that only saw through him, then both officers knew. Michael's trial was speedy to a fault. He was arrested, booked, tried, and found guilty within months, an act some in Haddonfield found too harsh. He's just a kid, was one such claim Brackett recalled during a town forum, though Hawkins was the first to admit he'd previously had similar objections. With the surmounting evidence laid before him, along with the sudden onset catatonia leading to a lack of credible defense against the charges, the decision was clear. Michael was unequivocally guilty. It was believed the boy had deep psychological problems, and his catatonia was described as a coping mechanism. He'd created a lockbox in which to imprison himself, completely rejecting the horrors of his actions and surrendering all agency. 11-year-old spree killer Michael Myers, once a bright young boy, now an unresponsive pariah, was sentenced to life at Smith's Grove Psychiatric Hospital, a peculiar Gothic structure located 200 miles north of Haddonfield, where he would be remanded into the care of one of the hospital's finest. Like a jukebox, the sheriff's subconscious plucked the recollection and began playing it from the beginning, as it did just about every night. Darkness covered Brackett as his mind fumbled through lurid dreams of reds and yellows. His body was tucked beneath the bed's satin sheets while his mind nosedived endlessly. From that darkness, and perhaps mercifully, a sound emerged, ripping the sheriff from the constraints of sleep. A repetitive, clanging noise. A ringing phone. Brackett groaned and cursed under his breath. His forearms swept across the mess of bedsheets layering over him, reaching up and around his wife to reach the phone as he stole a glance out the window. Sun's not even out. Brackett scratched at his stubble, bracing himself. It was the same every Halloween, an annual annoyance worse than the eggs being lobbed at his house. "Good morning, Doctor," he managed sarcastically. The line was quiet for a moment. Brackett could make out some ruffling. Then the caller pressed the phone closer to their face. "Sheriff, it's that time again." The familiar, yet now strained voice of Dr. Samuel Loomis replied back. Brackett could hear the damage that the smoking had done to him, turning what was once a smooth and commanding English voice into a hoarse and raspy imitation. Under different circumstances, he may have felt bad for the old man and his guilt. Self-cannibalizing lifestyles were too common around Haddonfield, and the sheriff had seen firsthand what it does to even the most constitutional. As is, Brackett had very little sympathy to go around these days, least of all to Sam Loomis. "You and your men must be vigilant. I intend to check the upper suburbs all the way to Main Street. I'll find out if anyone has heard or seen anything suspicious. Did you know there was a family, a woman and 2 children, bludgeoned to death in Russellville last October? Their bodies weren't found until January, but by that point..." Bludgeoned? Russellville? The sheriff had no clue what Loomis was on about, but the thought of listening to any more of the senseless rambling pained him. Worse yet, his wife, Monica, was beginning to stir. He plucked the sleep from his eyes, sat up on the bed, and secured the receiver to his ear before interrupting. "You know, Doctor, I'm just about there." "Where's that, Sheriff?" Loomis eagerly answered back, completely missing Brackett's obvious frustration. God help me. "The point where I stopped taking unnecessary phone calls and asinine demands from a disgraced shrink." Brackett's central Illinois accent thickened when he was irate. He knew the doctor would recognize this given their lengthy relationship. The sheriff could hear more rifling and fumbling from the other end of the line, and what he guessed must have been chewing. What a nutbag. After another moment of silence and chewing, the sheriff understood that the doctor was finished ranting. Satisfied, he continued. "It's been 5 years. He's dead, Doctor. Give it a rest. Remember what I told you last year, and don't call me next year." Surprisingly, Loomis's calm demeanor dropped, and a tirade of repressed emotions came forth from the receiver in Brackett's hand as it drifted back towards its cradle. "Sheriff, listen to me, Sheriff. He's coming to Haddonfield. Trust me, please. I was right the first time. I know him. I know how he thinks. I know he..." With the soothing bell of the receiver hitting the cradle came the end of the doctor's rant, followed closely by the whirling silence of the dark bedroom. His ears calmed, then relaxed, and finally the lull of sleep began to pull Brackett back down. It had been calm, quiet, serene. And as suddenly as it was quiet, it was once again racking Brackett's brain back and forth. As enticing as it seemed, Brackett wouldn't get back to sleep. The phone's ringer chimed loudly again in the dark room, and it rang through Brackett's ears, draining into the crevices and stabbing his eardrums like a needle. Wincing, Brackett raised his shoulder to block the opening of his ear, loudly cursing in the dark and fully waking his wife. When he'd finished jamming his finger into his ear hole, Brackett thrust the receiver to his chin. "God damn it, Loomis, if you call me again, I'll..." "Sheriff, it's Meeker." Deputy Ben Meeker. Brackett liked him. He didn't speak too loudly or step on your toes. But this wasn't reflecting well on the young officer. The sheriff turned back to his wife, just in time to catch her turning to face him, her piercing blue eyes bearing a hole through his own. A message he got loud and clear. "I'll take it outside, honey." Despite living in the house with Monica for the better part of 2 decades, Brackett couldn't recall ever agreeing to the unsightly green wallpaper in the hallway outside his bedroom. But nevertheless, there it was, surrounding him from head to toe in the dimly lit space as he stood slumped against the wall, arms folded across his body for warmth, nursing a phone receiver between his jaw and shoulder. He thought back to that night, to those dead eyes, focused straight ahead at a fixed point, but somehow unable to see anything right in front of them. He tried for years to force the image of those black eyes and their unsettling calmness from his mind, but it was hardest to forget when Halloween drew near. As he stood there, eyeing his daughter's bedroom door at the end of the ugly green hallway, he imagined how he'd feel if he were in the Doyle family's shoes, what he'd do if he lost his own daughter to such a senseless act. She's almost Judith's age. Brackett put it out of his mind and grunted into the receiver, signaling for Meeker to continue. Russellville Dispatch. They're getting reports of a man creeping around in the woods heading our way. Gang of hunters spotted him, tried to flag him down to see if he needed assistance, but they lost him somewhere south of Highway 71. Without opening his eyes, Brackett scoffed. What a morning this was turning out to be. Apparently Loomis wasn't the only person seeing things. Homeless folk come and go in the surrounding woodland all the time. It wasn't something the sheriff would ever consider a pressing matter. But Meeker had a good head on his shoulders. The deputy was one of embarrassingly few Haddonfield residents that mastered the art of don't speak if you have nothing to say, making him a bona fide Renaissance man in Brackett's eyes. Still, he sensed Meeker was burying the lead. Well, come on, is he injured? Does he have a weapon? I'm not seeing why you had to wake me and my wife for this. Get this. Witnesses are saying this guy was naked, head to toe. Hurry it up, Annie, you're gonna be late, Brackett commanded while thumping his fist against the bedroom door for the 3rd time that morning. He'd been late to respond to Deputy Meeker's call, partly due to his own unwillingness to babysit another town's lost bum, and partly due to the relatively low threat that a naked man in the woods posed to his slice of suburbia. But being the people's elected sheriff, it had to be vetted by him whether he liked it or not. After grumbling to himself for a while and eating whatever breakfast Monica prepared, Brackett was sure he'd feel better. For a 4th and final time, the sheriff thumped his fist against his daughter's door. That makes me feel better, too, he thought. All right, a muffled voice replied, followed by the tactile sound of fabric being climbed over, and finally 2 heavy thumps on the floor. Brackett could hear his daughter groaning about the coming school day's trials and tribulations while scrambling to make herself decent. After a beat, the door opened, and the sickly, peppery stink of marijuana, along with hormonal teenage odors, wafted over him. It was enough to make the sheriff swat at imaginary stink lines. The curly mop teen slunk outward, gripping the door frame with her left hand and using it to anchor herself as she struggled to adjust to the hallway's incandescent light. They were squinted, but Brackett could make out her baby brown eyes behind her crusted eyelids. His princess, smells and all. The sheriff put his palm on the door hinge and leaned in, kissing Annie on the forehead. She recoiled, but not as quickly as she normally does, Brackett noticed. Hoping this was a good sign, he smiled at her. And, for the first time in days, she smiled back, for just a moment. Geez, it's like you don't want me to get my beauty sleep, Dad. These good looks take effort, you know. Annie's sarcastic tone was uniquely her own, for better or worse. Brackett loved his daughter more than the air in his lungs, but he missed the time before she knew what sarcasm was. He'd settle for the new Annie, just not for too long, he hoped. She grabbed a towel and some clothes, ducked under Brackett's arm, and headed off to the bathroom. Before she could close her door, Brackett sneaked a glance inside. Empty chip bags, half-drunk cans of cola, and clothes strewn about without any care were just a handful of the items that blocked out the carpet of her bedroom. Where there once had been pink walls he'd painted at her request, he noted, posters and torn-out magazine centerfolds were stuck everywhere. Her bed, now box springless and directly on the ground, was predictably unmade and without a fitted sheet. The sheriff turned to catch his daughter as she shambled down the hallway. Aren't you ever going to clean up your room? It's a pigsty. Without missing a beat, Annie stopped in her tracks and hollered back. And I suppose that makes me the pig, huh? You know, Dad, sometimes you really hurt me with the things you say. Brackett dropped it, knowing full well this was her goal. Then Annie, the new Annie, told her father she loved him and continued to the bathroom. The sheriff returned to the kitchen, where a plate of bacon and sausage waited for him. Mrs. Monica Brackett was many things. A spitfire, a bombshell, a brick house. But a cook she was not, though he still loved her cooking as if it were a 3-star Michelin meal. It hadn't been but a decade since the recession hit, and Brackett remembered struggling to feed the three of them. Any food would be enough for Brackett, and he'd never tolerate waste. He placed his lips on his wife's cheek, and a hand atop hers, and laid his face against hers. Beautiful meal, darling. End of chapter 3.